right at 7 o'clock, and I see we've got a quorum of council. I will call our meeting to order. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick?
Here.
Councilmember Munson?
Here.
Councilmember Byström?
Here.
Councilmember Valento?
Here.
Mayor Bain?
Here. I'd like to invite everybody to join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. If you could get the flag displayed, and then if you'd like to shut off your video before you rise for the flag, you can do so in the bottom left of your Zoom tray. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Council, we have an agenda before you this evening. I will entertain a motion to approve or any changes.
Mayor Bain, I'll make a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. And Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick?
Aye.
Councilmember Munson?
Aye.
Councilmember Byström?
Aye.
Councilmember Valento?
Aye.
Mayor Bain?
Aye. Agenda is approved. Our next item this evening is open forum. And Karen, do we have any participants either in person or written submissions for open forum this evening?
Mayor Bain, I haven't received any information, emails or otherwise for open forum tonight.
Okay. With that, we will move on to our consent agenda. Council, for your consideration tonight are items 6A through 6M. I will entertain a motion to approve or any changes to the consent agenda.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda items 6A through 6M.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. And Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick?
Aye.
Councilmember Munson?
Aye.
Councilmember Byström?
Aye.
Councilmember Valento?
Aye.
Mayor Bain?
Aye. And our consent agenda is approved. Moving on to our regular agenda this evening, we have item 7A, which is the memorandum of agreement with the senior center coordinator position. Patrick, I believe you're walking us through this.
I am. The what's in front of you is a memorandum of agreement between the city and ATSME to include in the bargaining unit a part-time senior citizen coordinator. As you all know, we took over the senior center management this past year, and we determined that we needed to continue having a part-time employee there. Before it was had by Sharon. She was a 20 to, I think, maybe closer to 40-hour employee when she was working. What we need to do there, we currently have an interim person in the position. We would like to get this approved and then post the position for candidates, and then interview and hire whatever the successful candidate or the desired candidate will be. So it will continue to, the person or whoever is hired will be the primary coordinator of the senior center, doing the coordination of the programming and any events or anything that happens to come up with the senior center. We don't anticipate that it's a full-time position at this point, but we believe that the part-time position is necessary to have this continue in a relatively stable manner.
Thank you, Patrick. Council, questions you may have for the memorandum of agreement that's before us this evening. Councilmember Byström.
Administrator Casey, will the advisory board or board of directors still continue in their current capacity with the new senior center coordinator person?
Yeah.
In place?
Yes, they will transition to an advisory board and still be a part of the senior center makeup, and will continue to have meetings with the senior center coordinator to help direct the activities of the center. And I believe it's the current board current board will be still in place. We don't have any new members. It'll just transition to an advisory board.
Thank you.
Just I guess maybe a question for clarification. Our agreement with AFSCME requires a position of this nature to be part of the collective bargaining unit. Is that correct? Like this is adds a position to an existing agreement, and it's my understanding we don't have discretion on does this position fit or not? Is that right? Can you just help me walk
Yes,
through
no, under
how
the
this
current
fits?
under the current contract, this qualifies as a position that would be housed under the AFSCME contract. It is not a seasonal, it's not a limited hour. It's basically a part-time position that is under the contractual agreement that we have with AFSCME currently. So we really have to, unless we were to contract it out entirely like we had before, this is a requirement that we have to have this added to the contract. That's why in the memorandum of agreement, not only see the language, but we require to see the pay scale that's included. So,
Are there benefits to going this direction versus a contracted services position like we currently have? Are there reasons why we don't go that, continue that pathway?
I think it's really similar to what we've seen in some of the other activities we've had, that it's a city building, city owns the building. There was for lack of a better way to put it, confusing nature of the relationship between what the senior board was versus what the city was versus what the building rental was. The city subsidized the senior board at a tune of $50,000 to $60,000 annually for quote unquote maintenance. What that really did was subsidize the operations. It really wasn't as much maintenance as it was a subsidy. And to be honest with you, I don't think that contractually we could probably find someone that would be capable of doing this, or at least the pool would be short. And in addition, if it was contractual, if we left it the way it was, the senior board would be in charge of it. They would do the hiring. They would do the administration of it. I think this is a much more solid and dependable plan that not only will the seniors have a better experience and the center run more efficiently, but if in the future we'll have backup, we'll have plans, we'll have knowledge of what's going on with the operation, which none of what we had prior to this changeover.
So with the subsidy that we were paying, are we looking at a similar financial obligation?
Yeah.
Dollar.
Yeah, I don't right now, under looking at the initial cost of things, I don't anticipate a huge increase in the expenses that the city will be subsidizing.
Okay.
We're still getting into how much revenue they bring in for rentals or what they pay out for classes and things like that. But I don't anticipate it. I mean, if it's 50 to 60,000, it's not going to shoot to 250,000 or anything like that. I think it'll be probably within that ballpark, give or take $10,000 maybe. But I think that's the 60,000 I think was in the last budget is a safe estimate of what we will probably spend on the whole thing this current fiscal year. We may spend a little more because of some of the issues that we've found and had to fix as far as repair and maintenance and replacing carpeting and cleaning up the place. But as in the years go by, I think that's a fairly stable number to use.
Thank you.
Other questions on this topic? I guess I would just add a comment that, not really a question, just a comment on, if we start thinking about budget for parks, trails and lakes and associated programming for this next year, there's a number of activities that have happened this year, and this position being one of them, and just the transition that senior center has been in over this last year. It's going to require some different budget focus to make sure we've got things where they need to be. The EDA in the EDA meeting just updated the new tracks agreement, but there's been ongoing conversation around that new tracks contract, which is a transportation agreement, being better positioned on the city side rather than as an EDA activity. And so it's a little bit, that piece of it's a little bit of horse trading, but there's just a lot. We've taken on more programming and we've taken on more just function than if we were to look back 2 years on what we provided. I just want to make sure we've got the right space in the budget to do all of that well. So just
and to follow up, we also, the council has to also keep in mind that in the case of the senior center, the golf course, the long-term maintenance has been pretty much ignored in the past. We will have to make some of those improvements. We're addressing that now with some of the golf course issues. We're making minor capital improvements on the senior centers. I mentioned carpeting. We will have to integrate those into more of our capital improvement plan, kind of identify what the needs are to continue to keep now a new building up to date, but also a golf course up to date. And those will take a few years to integrate all of that and get an idea of where we're going and what we need. The senior center, for example, we need to look at the kitchen and the stove and the refrigerators and all of that. And the golf course, we need to look at not only the sand traps and the greens and the tees, but also the building, and et cetera. So just keep in mind that we're getting into all of those things, and we will continue to identify those, but it's taken us a little bit to figure out where all the things are and what the works are. So, but I think we're making good progress on both the senior center and the golf course, to be honest with you.
Thank you, Patrick. Other questions or comments on the specific item? Again, the item for council's consideration tonight is the memorandum of agreement of the senior center coordinator position, our agreement with ASME. Councilmember Husnick. Oh, Sam, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Who does this person answer to directly? Is she?
It's kind of a combination, to be quite honest with you. Me and Jamie will help direct that as well, since she's the recreation person. We're hoping, like the golf course, we'll funnel major decisions as far as policy and things through the parks, trails, and lake. But it's kind of Jamie and I and Dan, we all kind of coordinate that together.
All right. Okay. That clears it up. Thank you.
Other questions? I'll entertain a motion if anyone's ready. Councilmember Husnick.
Sure. I'd make a motion that we approve the memorandum of agreement for the senior center coordinator position as outlined by Patrick.
And I'll second.
A motion from Councilmember Husnick and a second from Councilmember Munson. Any further discussion on this? Hearing none, Karen, could we have a vote, please?
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson,
Aye.
Councilmember Byström,
Aye.
Councilmember Valento,
Aye.
Mayor Bain.
Aye, and motion's approved. Our next item this evening is Resolution 06142103, the Min-Warn Mutual Aid Agreement. And Dave, I believe you're walking us through this. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Kind of going through my memo. So this year we had to put together a risk and resiliency assessment, as well as a emergency response plan, specifically for the water treatment system. And as we're going through it, we kind of noticed a major hole in our emergency response plan, being that, as you know, we have so many lift stations, 45 of them, and our 3 water plants, that if a natural disaster or man-made disaster happened, we would have some issues to be able to continue running the stations and running the water plant. So doing some research and talking with some other cities, kind of walked upon this Min-Warn. So it's a group of cities. Your attachment on the memo, it kind of shows teardrops throughout the state, plus some teardrops just in the metro area. Many municipalities and state government that all belong to this, and it's kind of like a mutual aid agreement, like the police and fire have. That, you know, if there's an issue in our city, we can call for help and people will respond, or if there's an issue in a different city and we have extra assets that we can lend to them to help get through an emergency. The mutual aid it's free to join. There's no responsibility for us to respond if there is an emergency and we don't have staff or the time to respond. We're not required to. Like I said, it's free. So it's just something that I think would be nice to have as a city, that if we do have a situation, it's one phone call and it kind of puts out the bat signal to all the other neighboring communities that can help us out. I mean, there's tons of rental companies and stuff where we can get equipment, but to be able to get equipment and staff that know kind of what they're doing is a lot better. If they need to, you know, bounce generators around or help back out a station, it's a lot better to have other public works employees being the ones doing it, because they're around it as well. So I had legal review it. They gave it its blessing, the mutual aid agreement. So I guess any other questions you guys have for me? Otherwise, I'm just looking for approval of the mutual aid agreement and passage of the resolution.
Thank you, Dave. Council, questions for Dave this evening on the mutual aid agreement?
I don't think I, really have any questions. Just kind of curious how, I mean, I read Article 4 and 5 about, kind of how that cost reimbursement works, that sort of thing. Actually 6. So Dave, what I think I'm hearing from you kind of in a practical sense is that, we have a national disaster and it's just a phone call to sort of this central agency then that kind of manages or assists in management of the needs of the city. Is that correct? Am I understanding that correct? And then we don't have any obligation unless, those expenses are incurred, right? We have to bring rental equipment in or staffing from another community or that kind of thing. Am I understanding that correctly?
Correct. Yep. So the city, whether it's the mayor or the administrator, would have to declare a state of emergency for the city. Once that happens, that I would call that one phone number, and then they automatically just triggers calls and emails to everybody else in the group. So if a city like ourselves, if we get an emergency, every city or contact for the men will get an email and a phone call, and it'll state what the emergency is, and how we need help. So my phone call would be, we have say, like on my example in the memo, a tornado went through. We need generators, we need vac trucks, and we need some staff. I mean, so then people that had that kind of equipment could respond, or they may not want to respond either, but it's specific to what you need, so that people won't be calling you back saying, okay, what are you looking for? You need dump trucks or plow trucks, or whatever. They specifically know what you're looking for. But then vice versa, if a city has an emergency, I'll get that call, but I can make that decision whether if we have enough staff, or if we're strained on staff the way it is, that we choose not to send them. So we do get reimbursed for sending staff. It does get reimbursed back through this agreement. So I mean, if we have staff available, I mean, we always want to help other people out as well too, because if we're in that situation, we'd hope people would come and help us too. So it'd just be a judgment at that point in time whether we have the staff necessary to go out there. So
So is this just related to public works infrastructure then? I mean, if there were other needs, kind of a medical response or that sort of thing, does that function run kind of through this as well, or is that separate?
That would be separate. This is strictly utilities, so sewer, water, and stormwater. It's
Okay.
just those three utilities is basically what this group is for.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Yep.
Dave, thank you for finding the kind of the hole in our emergency response planning. And this is a nice, it's nice to both have the hole identified, but then also filled. So I'm happy to support this and appreciate Councilmember Bystrom's questions around some of the, just more of the logistics of how the agreement works. I'm assuming that we are, if we were, I don't know, if there were some sort of a natural disaster and we had maybe it wasn't enough of a hit that we were needing to request assistance, but perhaps we were stressed. I'm assuming that we are able to make that call independently if we are not able to provide mutual aid assistance. Just want to make sure that you're comfortable with having the right control, and we need to not respond if that's what we need to do given what might be happening in our own community.
Yep, like I said, it's a judgment call. If I myself feel that we can't let staff go or let a generator, borrow a generator for a few days, that's the judgment call you make. But if it's something, I guess I would say if you see something close, maybe Thief River Falls has an incident, we're probably not going to be sending staff up there. But if Hugo or Plymouth or Coon Rapids or somewhere close, Stacy, where they're close, where you can go and help somebody out for the day or bring them up a generator, and that that's kind of where I foresee our assistance going. We don't have the staff to go and put them up in hotel rooms for a week straight, in outstate Minnesota. So I see us responding more in the metro area, and I kind of see that's where our help would come from as well. The people closest to us. It's a lot to ask to have someone drive 4 or 5 hours to come and help out, so.
Perfect. Council, any other questions? Happy to entertain a motion. The resolution is resolution 06142103.
Mayor Bain, I move adoption of resolution 06142103, the Min-Warn Mutual Aid Agreement.
I'll second it if no one else wants to. I'll second it.
We have a motion from Councilmember Bystrom and a second from Councilmember Husnick. Any further discussion this evening? Hearing none. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson,
Aye.
Councilmember Bystrom,
Aye.
Councilmember Valento,
Aye.
Mayor Bain.
Aye, and motion is approved. Our next agenda item this evening is item 7C, ordinance number 703, the 2021 fee schedule amendment. And Karen.
Thank you, Mayor Bain. This is an ordinance to amend our 2021 fee schedule. So this was brought forward to the council, I believe, at the last council meeting. The biggest changes on this would be to parks in the field rental fees and tournament fees. And then also at that time of the last meeting, it was requested by Councilmember Bystrom that some language or something in there be included about fees being waived for school educational groups. So that was included as well onto the ordinance. The other items were the same as you saw at the previous meeting. So there was some changes to planning and zoning for driveway access permit fees, and then for the Public Works Department for hydrant meter and wrench deposit fees. And then there was a couple language corrections that were in there.
Thank you, Karen. And yes, as you mentioned, this has been a topic of a number of workshop discussions. Council, as you review through these final changes, or most recent round of changes, fee schedule is never final, right? Any questions or updates? All right. Happy to entertain a motion.
Madam Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve ordinance number 703, amending Title 3, Chapter 35 of the City Code and the city's fee schedule, amending certain Park Department fees, adding clarifying language to administrative fees, and correcting clerical terms to Fire Department fees.
Thank you, Councilmember Munson. There's a motion. Is there a second?
A second.
And a second from Councilmember Byström. Any further discussion on this? Hearing none. Karen, can we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson,
Aye.
Councilmember Byström,
Aye.
Councilmember Valento,
Aye.
and Mayor Bain.
Aye. Motion is approved. Our next item this evening, 7C, ordinance number 703, which, I'm sorry, 7D, which is ordinance 704, the summer patio interim ordinance. And Donovan, I believe you are walking us through this.
Certainly. Mayor, members of council, I'd like to present ordinance number 704 for your consideration. This is an interim ordinance that would allow for the summer patios that some of you may have been enjoying this summer. They were part of the flexibility granted to local businesses for outdoor dining during this time in which there was emergency declaration during the pandemic. What this proposal is, and this was, my name is written on the agenda, we do have ghostwriters in the form of Pete and Amanda who did craft this text. And basically I'd like to share with you briefly what this extension does. And this is needed just in case Governor Walz does not extend or does suddenly end the emergency declaration, and any sort of flexibilities granted these businesses would end at that time. So this is meant as a keeps the ability for local businesses to have these outdoor dining areas, which currently number in 4, according to Lieutenant Weiss. I'd like to share the, sorry, it's not the share I wanted. I believe the just the four conditions of this temporary license program, that it limits the outdoor seating to 50 people beyond the outdoor seating otherwise that has been permitted by the city. Applicants must demonstrate that service location plan does not adversely impact health, safety, and welfare. Licenses expire on October 31st, the end of the summer dining season. And businesses in good standing that were issued licenses under that original emergency declaration are automatically renewed through October 31st of this year. And so this is really meant to be the interim to allow for the summer, basically for summer patios to continue. I'd like to offer as a context that perhaps this is something that the Planning Commission will take up as perhaps some permanent changes to offer some flexibility. And I don't, I don't have for certain what that would look like, but I could imagine it'd be some alternative to site plan review to allow for these, that there's really no sort of permanent construction and no big impact to impervious surface or utilities or traffic visibility, that sort of thing. So with that, I'm happy to take in questions from the Planning Commission. And also, Pete, if you want to add to, if I misstated anything, please feel free to jump in.
Your Honor, members of council, I don't have anything to jump in on Donovan for right now, but I'm certainly happy to answer questions.
I have a curiosity. Whoops. Yeah, I have just a curiosity question. Did we poll the existing businesses to see if they were interested in continuing at all? Or have they been made aware that we've been considering this?
I have not had discussions with them, though I did have discussions with two of the 4 regarding, what they want to do for this summer season, and the changes they proposed were permanent, and I didn't feel as a staff member I could, and I said you could take it through the formal site plan review. They declined, and they still have summer dining. So they continued, but this is something I think that we probably do want to have the conversations with those business owners to really poll what they'd like, and craft some. I'd like to see craft some zoning text amendment for this type of use, of course, with in conjunction with those local business owners.
Pete, can you hold on just a second? Just a point of clarification. So you've had conversation. It's just that what they are asking for is outside of the scope of what we're able to accommodate under the interim, and would require a more permanent policy change. Did I hear that right?
Yeah. I mean, I think businesses have seen this as a real way to expand their businesses, and so they're prepared to make investments, but because of they weren't that prepared. I mean, it's kind of uncertain time, I believe. So these are conversations in April and early May. So
okay.
I believe it's a little different environment as far as people's feeling of safety, in these public settings.
Okay, thank you. I think I interrupted Pete. I think you had a question.
Your Honor, members of council, I had a comment to add a little additional context here in response to Councilmember Bystrom's question about polling businesses. This interim ordinance comes from my perspective, as a council initiative for staff to be examining what happens when the emergency expires, and to be on the right footing for A, not catching anyone with their guard down, and B, studying whether or not it would be a good idea to consider making some changes to what we do allow during our summer season. And for that reason, we've brought this forward now, anticipating the next item on your agenda.
Council members, other questions or points of clarification? Councilmember Husnick, go ahead.
Yeah, I've always been in favor of this idea of being able to do what they're doing there, get them back in business, and all we're doing is really giving them the opportunity to go ahead. And so I'm certainly in favor of this new ordinance, and I would support it, and I will support it.
I'd also like to note that I did present this draft to the Planning Commission last Wednesday night, and they pretty much echoed your sentiment, Councilmember Husnick, that they felt in strong support of local businesses.
Yeah.
Donovan, just in terms of additional color, what's the type of feedback that you are receiving that they would like to like us to accommodate that is more future consideration? Do you have a couple of examples of kind of what those asks would be?
Things that relate to, say, height of fences, for noise buffering was one thing.
Okay. Okay.
The ability to do summer improvements without full engineering. I think that was kind of my hard stop, where I felt like once you're working with impervious surface and uncertainty of utility easements, and you're talking about permanent improvements, if you're putting a picnic table out there, I don't believe that there's going to be any sort of permanent impact. But we do have sidewalk seating standards, so this is different. Those are mostly geared toward, say, the Lake Street, downtown dining, where you're doing this within the public right of way. So these are also different, private, where I believe that there can be some more discretion given to staff because of the impacts. Will mostly be private, and I think we can, just a quick site visit and with clear plans, I think tailor each outdoor seating experience to the setting.
Thank you. That's helpful, and always helpful to hear the types of requests that are coming in. Council, other questions on this topic? The ordinance 704 is on page 172 of your packet. Happy to entertain a motion whenever anyone's ready.
Mayor Bain, I move approval of ordinance 704, an interim ordinance extending the summer patio temporary license program established in resolution 06-15-20-01 through October 31st, 2021.
I'll second.
We have a motion from Councilmember Byström and a second from Councilmember Valento. Any further discussion on this? All right. Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick,
Aye.
Councilmember Munson,
Aye.
Councilmember Byström,
Aye.
Councilmember Valento,
Aye.
Mayor Bain.
Aye, and motion's approved. That is a good segue to our next topic, which is the expiration of the local emergency declaration. And Pete, you've provided us a memo. Do you want to walk us through this agenda item?
Certainly, Your Honor. Mayor Bain, members of council, since the inception of the pandemic, when the mayor declared a local state of emergency, this council has come back every couple of months to see whether it was still appropriate to continue that state of emergency. And in the last few months, checking it even more frequently to determine whether or not it's still appropriate and necessary to have it. For some background and context, the city used its emergency powers for essentially three things. One was to maintain an open channel for any kind of emergency funding that might require us to have declared a local emergency. As I indicated, and what I'm about to say is all kind of summarizing what was in the memo. The national nature of the emergency made it clear that everyone was getting their aid from the federal government, regardless of whether there's a local declaration or not. Second, the city was able to establish a grant program to spend some of that federal aid to help its local businesses and I believe some nonprofits. And third, established some flexibility, as Donovan was just talking about, by the resolution mentioned in the last interim ordinance to allow some additional sort of relief, some capacity for restaurants and bars who had their capacity severely cut back during the pandemic and the governor's orders around indoor and outdoor seating capacity, social distancing, and that's obvious impact on that type of business. The mayor retains at all times the power by statute to declare an emergency if anything should change, and hopefully it doesn't. It's great news to finally be here and talking about a recommendation to allow the local emergency to expire tomorrow instead of why we're going to need it for more months. The grant money has been distributed. That program is complete. The outdoor dining, we now have an interim ordinance as of 3 minutes ago that protects the local businesses against any abrupt turns in what they're allowed to do right now in the middle of their season while studying what we might want to do next. And so since our last meeting where this was discussed, in which our last meeting, the governor's order became effective May 28th that rescinded essentially all of the restrictions that govern life in the city. And so at that point, it seems there's no obvious reason to continue to be under a state of emergency. And so our recommendation is to allow it, my recommendation is to allow it to expire. And if council wants to discuss it and decides otherwise, we can deal with that as well tonight. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Pete. And so tonight's agenda item is so Pete, if I understand, action is not required tonight. So no action tonight means that the emergency declaration expires tomorrow. We put it on the action item should council choose to take a different path. But Pete, I'm I don't want to, never want to put words in your mouth, but it seems like it's staff's recommendation that we would allow for that expiration, or that the emergency orders to expire.
Thank you for the clarification, Your Honor. I always intend to end with what's being asked of council.
That's okay. That's okay.
That is our recommendation. If you accept the recommendation, no action is needed tonight. The resolution continuing the emergency expires tomorrow. And so, as you indicated, it's only on the action items in the agenda in case council wishes to go a different direction.
Thank you for that. Council, we'll just open up the floor, get your thoughts. If I'm recalling correctly, the last time this was on an agenda about 4 weeks ago, at the end of May, I believe the thought at that time was, let's extend for another 4 weeks and allow for some additional time for vaccines to have deeper impact and more people to be vaccinated. Also at that time, the governor's mask mandate and those changes were not yet in effect. So just want to provide an opportunity for some thoughts on where we are as of this moment. I'll just open it up.
I have a question for Peter. It seemed like I was listening to the fact that the governor was going to extend some of his powers for another month. I would assume they're more limited and that kind of thing. Maybe you could expand on that, or whatever you know about it.
Certainly, Your Honor, Councilmember Husnick. I don't have any secret pathway to the governor's mind, but what they have published is the reason to maintain emergency powers at the governor's level is for the logistics and oversight of managing the continued vaccination and testing efforts.
Okay.
There's nothing published that indicates the governor is considering any kind of new orders regulating life in society.
Okay, I just want to make sure that we're not overstepping our bounds here. So, because I'm totally in favor of letting it expire.
Thank you for that clarification, Councilmember Husnick, because we've kind of wanted to, or I think we've had a motivation to stay in sync and to make sure we were certainly following what was recommended at the state level. As I personally looked at what was still in effect at the state level, I don't see that. I see it as incredibly important. I don't see it as part of our critical role here within the city of Forest Lake. And so I too am very open to us allowing I would hope that we would allow for those emergency orders to expire tomorrow. I think they've had their place. I think residents and businesses have been well served. The community's been well served by having them in their place. But I think we're at the spot where we can now move one step closer back to life as usual and in-person meetings, and especially with the action that we just took to kind of give some ongoing powers to the sidewalk ordinance that had been kind of the one remaining piece that we were still using. So with that, I too support allowing the expiration to take place, but open to want to hear others' thoughts as well.
I support it as well. I'm wondering if maybe Dan can kind of clarify. I know that we've been talking a lot about technology and the availability of technology and the potential for a hybrid model. And I'm just wondering if we can just hear what that means for us. I'm assuming under open meeting law, we are required to head back into chambers. But what does that mean for our community in terms of, being able to remote in?
Great question.
Members of the council, can everybody hear me?
Faintly, maybe lean a little
now?
closer.
Is it a little bit better now?
Yes.
So to answer Councilmember Bystrom's point on what does it look like from a blended meeting perspective, council chambers is set up right now. I actually have this meeting zooming through the audio system within council chambers. So when you come back into council chambers, we can still allow for consultants, for members of the public who aren't comfortable coming into a public setting to both view and participate in the meeting through Zoom like they have been in the past. You'll see those on the screens on the dais in front of you, as well as the screens within council chambers. Audio that is in the room is set up so the mic system works just like you're normally sitting here, but the Zoom meeting also feeds in. So if we have a consultant who wants to Zoom in You'd be able to see their presentation, hear their presentation. Same if you have a resident who wants to come in and give open forum testimony or speak to council, they'd be able to do that like they have in the past through Zoom. So we're going to maintain all of that. The way that Chambers is currently set up is there's distance as close to 6 feet apart as we possibly can. A few of them are a little bit closer together. Staff tables are sitting in front of the dais, but we do have distancing in right now set up. Microphone system, I'm working on getting staff mics, so all staff will have mic as well. Right now, I'm waiting. A couple of pieces are back ordered just due to some supply chain issues, but I'm hoping those will be in stock before the first meeting. If not, I do have a workaround that I can implement just for a meeting until we get the more permanent mic bases in. But from a resident's perspective, they're still going to be able to do everything that they can through Zoom moving forward. The main difference is council members of the board will be here. And we're also set up not only just for the members of council, but also for the larger boards, planning commission, for example. We can get everybody there using the dais and the staff table and still maintain a level of distancing to make sure everybody's comfortable transitioning back into council chambers.
Thank you, Dan. Other questions of staff or thoughts on this topic? Again, no action is required this evening unless we choose to extend. Just want to make sure we've given opportunity. All right, not hearing any further discussion and also not seeing any intent of council to make a motion to extend, we will move on to our next agenda item. All right, that closes our regular agenda and moves us into our discussion items. Just quick note, discussion items are workshop topics, working topics of council. Formal action will not be taken this evening. This is a working session only. Anything that is discussed that would require formal action would come back at a future council meeting. And so with that, we will transition into tonight's workshop topic, which is city code enforcement. And Pete, you are also leading us through this item this evening.
Thank you, Your Honor, members of council. At a recent meeting, I was asked to bring before council for discussion a continuation of a workshop item that you had without me around code enforcement strategy and options for the city, and in particular, what civil code enforcement actions might look like as opposed to something involving the police department. As you may or may not be aware, your code is written to allow code enforcement to be conducted by whomever you designate, but it defaults to the police. And it seems like it was written with an expectation that policing the code, like other kinds of policing, is a police department thing. And the reality is that's not true for this city or really any city. Code enforcement matters that we're talking about span the gamut from someone's fence is too high to someone has a junkyard or a really noisy house, or there's a dangerous building that was on fire and they haven't done anything to clean it up after the fire, or we can have public nuisance types of issues. We can have building and zoning code types of issues, and that's 30,000 foot level. There are others if we want to start to get into hypotheticals. And so one of the questions is, how do we manage them? What does it cost? And what can we do other than having a pitched battle with our community that costs a lot of money over every little thing? That's my words. No council member put that in my mouth. The fact of the matter is, a city with 20,000 people that's growing, that's developing, is going to have all sorts of code enforcement issues, code violations at all times. And that's true for you, that's true for every other city. And so the way that cities handle these are, first of all, we address them on a complaint basis. We don't go looking for code violations. We don't have officers of city government out in the neighborhoods looking for reasons to tell somebody that they're violating city code. It only comes to us when there is a complaint or multiple complaints. Second, As a matter of practicality, there really is no choice other than to take a triage approach to these things. We have limited resources, both in staff and budget, to address code violations. So we attempt to tackle the problems that are burning the hottest as efficiently and pragmatically as we can, and then move on to the next one. I laid out in the memo that's in the packet a couple of the typical civil types of actions. One is called a 463 action that's specifically designed for hazardous or unsafe buildings. I gave an example a moment ago about the building that caught fire but hasn't ever been cleared. That would be an unsafe building. But it also applies to homes that have junk, refuse, garbage piled up inside of them, that are vermin harborages, that have unsecured windows, buildings, and exterior envelopes that make the place not only unsafe for the inhabitants, but something that is a breeding ground of pestilence or other hazards to the community. For that type of problem, first of all, that is the kind of problem that tends to be high on the priority list, because we're not talking about livability, we're talking about health and safety. The statutes in Minnesota, Chapter 463, provides a relatively streamlined pathway for the city to order the property owner to correct the problem promptly, and if they don't, the city has the power to make the correction itself and then assess the costs of that correction, including attorney's fees, against the property as a special assessment. As I indicated in my memo, in the rare cases where an owner contests that type of action, it proceeds like an ordinary trial in civil court, with one exception I didn't put in my memo, which is this is an expedited matter. Again, the law recognizes this is a health and safety thing, and we're not going to spend 18 months doing litigation. But the point is, if it is contested, it can be staff intensive and resource intensive to fight to get the problem solved. And then outside of the types of code violations that are about hazardous and unsafe buildings, we can always bring a civil action. And I tend to think of these as basically any kind of code violation that's generating complaints, that's affecting life in the community, but that doesn't also already have the attention of the police department for other reasons. For example, the kind of house that becomes a home of prostitution is going to be full of code violations, but it probably also has a perhaps more pressing police attention kind of given to it than the kind of violation where someone built their fence in the setback and the neighbor's complaining. And so for the civil violations, where we're not talking about the kinds of things that are what sworn officers became police officers to deal with, we have the civil route where we can commence a lawsuit in court to ask for what's called an injunction, and that's basically the court ordering whoever the violator is and whatever the nature of the violation is, ordering them to come into compliance. And if they contest that they're in violation, or that there's some reason the city doesn't have the power to make them comply, that can be a trial. And sometimes it can be a trial followed by a secondary trial about how the court's going to enforce its order against somebody who is not well positioned to either understand or be able to bring themselves to recognize the authority of the court to tell them what to do. As I indicated in my memo, and I do not wish to take a deep dive on this, it's not uncommon for code enforcement matters to be dealing with folks in very poignant and challenging circumstances. And so that's a challenge for the city. It's also a challenge for the courts. However, judges do not allow their orders to be ignored. And I could give you one anecdotal example of a case like that, where we had to go all the way through trial. The court ordered the person to come into compliance. The person refused to. We were in front of the court on contempt proceedings. The person was arguing to the court that not that he wasn't in contempt, but that the judge was wrong, his order was wrong. And long story short, the person ended up in jail for contempt of court. And the point of the story for the council is that's a long and expensive piece of litigation. That's a lot of time in court. And that there are sometimes folks that we encounter in the code enforcement side of life that have trouble coming to our sense of what seems like norms and acting accordingly. And so bottom line for discussion, I recommend council consider as we're entering budgeting season, considering what sorts of resources you have staff-wise and budget-wise to have some kind of meaningful response to violations so that the citizens recognize when they complain, the city does have resources to address it as best we can, when we can, on a triage type basis. And also for the citizens to recognize that if you just wait us out, we'll go away. That's not a good option either. And so that's sort of my teeing up the discussion, Your Honor, and I'm happy to answer questions and continue as you direct.
Thank you, Pete. That is very helpful as we kind of consider kind of next steps for this conversation. Again, no action required this evening, just some additional information to put in front of council, have some discussion, answer some questions, and start thinking about some recommended next steps. And with that, I'll just open it up and to see if anyone has thoughts or questions, preferences. I'm interested in hearing what's on your mind tonight.
Well, as I recall, Administrator Casey brought this up a while ago. We had a conversation on this topic. Oh gosh, I bet you it was at least a year ago, maybe longer. And as we were preparing perhaps for budget season, and we know this is a huge issue for us. You know, this is probably one of the, I mean, we hear it from city leaders. It's probably one of the most frequent phone calls they receive, you know, is a code, code violation issue. But as I recall, Administrator Casey, you had some experience or some recommendations around kind of pulling back law enforcement, as I recall, having a code enforcement officer in a polo shirt, and really kind of taking sort of that preventative educational, approach, motivating compliance versus emphasizing punishment, which, this isn't a personal affront, Chief, but when the police show up at your door, you do get a little worried about what's happening there. So, and I don't know that it's necessarily a good use in some cases of law enforcement resources, unless we're really concerned about safety and well-being, because they tend to, have a little higher degree of respect in that regard than somebody in a polo shirt, perhaps. But so I just, that was my kind of recollection of that conversation that we had, and just a summary of it. And it sounds to me as though, Pete, that's one of the options that you are kind of encouraging us to take a look at here, and maybe consider that as we're entering into budget season. I don't know that we do this consistently enough, not consistently as we should be. I think a lot of things kind of fall by the wayside, and then it comes back to us that, we need to do a better job of enforcing code out in the community. So just some kind of initial thoughts for me. I understand with the community, there's just, there's sometimes a perceived intrusiveness on the part of the city when we're doing this work, but, we have to balance that. I think we also don't want that unfettered personal liberty to do whatever we want, whenever we want to do it, right? We do have obligations to our neighbors and fellow citizens in the community. So again, just some initial thoughts on my end. Sorry, that was a little longer than I expected it to be.
That's all right. Other Other thoughts? Patrick, you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I totally agree that we should be looking at the polo shirt type of enforcement. So for lack of a better way to put it, I agree that a police officer unfortunately escalates the problem usually when they walk up to the door for a property maintenance issue. The challenge has been and continues to be resources in this city and how we can best budget for and use our staff to do that. Within the last month, I've had discussions with Fire Chief Newman, who supervises the building department. We've talked extensively about this with him and Corey, the building official. We have a vacant inspector one position, building inspector one position that we haven't filled this year. We've been using MinSpec to fill some of that gap, just to be financially conservative. We've reviewed all the building inspector job descriptions, and each of the job description includes in there a property maintenance inspection. We were concerned about if we start to use those positions a little bit. The thought was to use the building inspectors, at least on a part-time basis, not take them entirely away from building inspectors, obviously, but to use them to also do property maintenance. And before we got too far down that road, we looked at the job descriptions to be sure that that was in those, and actually they are in them. So property maintenance is a responsibility of the building inspectors. Since we have a vacant position, we would hire a building inspector one to do more of the property maintenance and then fill in with the building inspections. What we are consciously aware of is we don't want to slow down building inspections or any inspections of that matter. That will still be the priorities of not only the building official, the other building inspector, but also the new building inspector. However, we will shift some of those those property maintenance duties away from Donovan and zoning enforcement to this new position, with the purpose of trying to get compliance. In my experience with property maintenance, and I think Pete said this very well, it's a very difficult thing to get people to comply with property maintenance, particularly if they're not interested in complying. We are not interested, I don't think, or should be interested as a city to go to court or to fine people for property maintenance. It's really to clean up your yard, clean up your house, and do that. So we have started that process of trying to identify how that's going to be structured. We should have that before budget time this fall. It won't cost the city any more money if we do it this way. To be honest, I think there's a lot of other priorities as far as positions in the city that we need to look at, and we'll come forth with before budget time as well, or with the plan that financial plan that we're putting together. But I think that's what we're looking at as a good alternative to try to help enforcement and take some of the initiative to get those complaints taken care of. Again, I also believe that this will be more of a complaint-based process because that's where we get them. I mean, we have plenty of work to do with people calling on the phone or writing us emails without having to go out and search for these things. So we still will be available to respond to all those kind of calls. Donovan's workload will be not eliminated, but lightened, I should say, so that he can concentrate more on what he's supposed to do as far as that goes. And to be honest with you, code enforcement or property maintenance enforcement is a seasonal thing. You usually don't do a lot of code enforcement between November through April because the snow covers most of the mess up. Complaints dwindle down to nothing. So I think that's a good approach that we're going to take. We've talked about putting building inspectors in those polo shirts or some kind of a uniform that identifies them, because really they go out now, a flannel shirt or jeans or whatever, their t-shirts, and all they have is a name tag. Well, I think that as they go out to inspections, whether a building inspector or a property maintenance inspector, they need to be identified on some kind of clothing or jacket so that when they walk up, that they're just not mistaken for somebody who's just walking on their property. So once we get that nailed down, we will also take a look at what kind of processes we are going to use, complaint forms, notifications, letter notifications, and the new software that we bought for building. It does have a complaint tracking system that we will use to monitor and step by step. So we're working on it, and hopefully, like I said, sometime by the beginning of budget season, August, we'll nail this down a little bit more and present it to the council.
Thank you, Patrick. Just one other point that I think what kind of precipitated this conversation and the additional agenda item tonight is, as I understand it, we do not have a traditional path, or maybe even an identified path of pursuing civil action. And I think there's been perhaps a couple of things that have brought this to a head. On one hand, our traditional path, and the court systems have been backlogged, and cases have been slow. And am I correct in saying that we've gotten kind of a general, we just feel that those are not of high priority to the court? And so I think there was a question that was posed to council of, should we consider an alternative path for some of those higher enforcement items? And that alternative path is civil action. And I just want to make sure that that's all. I think that's one part of what's new, because again, that's not something that we've traditionally, I think that's a question. As I understand, that's one of the policy questions before council is, are we open to considering that? And Pete, am I teeing that up appropriately?
Your Honor, yes, you are. For a lot of the things that Patrick described, all comes down to really good administration and minimizing the kinds of enforcement issues that elevate to the need for some more strong coercive response. But I've been the city attorney for a year, and you haven't started a civil action yet. I can tell you in other cities of this size, you would expect there to be one or two going at any given time, because there's so many people out there doing what they're doing that are not able to respond to what fully sophisticated and resourced departments are able to do. It would be lovely to have a season or two or three in a row where everything was resolved without needing civil enforcement. But I don't think that the need can be eliminated. And if and when something rises, I should make this point too, I omitted to make, Your Honor. When something rises to the level of that, where we've made these efforts, staff has made these efforts, they haven't succeeded. And is this a priority enough, a hot enough fire that you want to commence a civil action? That's a call for council. That's not the city attorney's decision, not Patrick's decision. We bring that to you to authorize the action.
And so I appreciate that decision is a call of council. The recommendation to head down that path, does staff have that option on the table today, or do we need to do something to kind of give them that tool as part of the enforcement options that they're considering? I appreciate that the decision to pursue is council's, but do you need a green light? Is there a policy green light that needs to be set by council to say that we now approve that as an option if circumstances warrant it?
Your Honor, members of council, you don't need anything new or different in your code or in your policy for that pathway to be available. It is available. There are things about the code Patrick and I have been talking about when we have an opportunity, sort of again, triaging. There are things that we could maybe work a little bit better, but that's not one of them. You always have that authority.
Yeah, and
oh, go ahead, Patrick.
And we do have that authority, and I think really it's come down to, and Pete kind of mentioned, making sure that we have the proper ordinances and the proper things there, but also more than anything else, the resources behind it. And I give Donovan as much credit as I can for sliding this into his day-to-day work. Again, it goes back to property maintenance being very difficult, but it has to be very documented and very process-driven, so that when we come to a council, or if for whatever reason we go before a judge, a jury, that we have the documentation and the steps in place that we can show what the city's done, how it's done, and why it's done. And to be honest with you, it's been more hit or miss. We just didn't have the resources or the organizational structure to do that, and that's what we're trying to change internally with the shifting of this Inspector 1 position a little more to property maintenance. In the long run, I would argue probably we will go to some kind of full-time property maintenance or a combination of a CSO or whatever the case may be. But I think that, again, with all the staffing priorities and other financial priorities, that if we can do it this way, I think and then structure the mechanisms correctly to build that evidence case, or build that case that we can A, bring to council, and B, bring to the courts. I think that's where we really need to focus.
With recognizing this is kind of a layered approach, right? There's multiple factors to consider. With one of the factors being staff, to make sure that we've addressed appropriately, we have the thorough process as needed. I guess if we are considering a different path of enforcement that we haven't traditionally considered, which would be civil action, is there a need for us to have another layer of specificity or detail in our existing ordinance to better align with those requirements and that process? Or is our existing code sufficient for that avenue of enforcement?
Yeah, that's the discussion Pete mentioned that we are having now, and we'll continue to have for the next couple of weeks here, about, does the code address the things we need to address? Is it specific enough that we can enforce it? So, for example, we rely a lot on what's called the nuisance ordinance. And
Yep.
Is that too broad? Is it too specific? I mean, we need to kind of just go through that. And if there's a need to more specifically call out property maintenance issues, whatever they may be, we'll bring that forward. I mean, you're all familiar with, if there's junk cars and unregistered cars, and we can handle that. If the building has been burnt or in a fire, that's pretty apparent. That's not so hard. But when I have that stack of boards sitting behind the shed that's got mold and mildew, and I keep you start getting hoarders outside it. I've seen in my past properties that have their yards just full of stuff. How do you define that? You define that as a nuisance. So we have to have those discussions, to be quite honest with you.
That's helpful, and kind of bringing this to kind of next layer of kind of support or preference. I fully support the transition of the active enforcement from moving from being police focused to more staff focused. I think it's the right approach, and I think it just is counter to resident expectations on who's enforcing, and when the police show up at their door, I just don't think that that's the role that they see the police being in. And so I support that, and I also support just the approach of us kind of looking again at our existing ordinances and getting to a better level of specificity. So it makes enforcement just easier at the staff level. And if we had to take a more aggressive action, that we've got our ducks in a row, and it's I don't know if there's ever an easier case, but certainly we can do things to help ourselves to make that a more just tangible process. Other thoughts on this topic?
Just a
go ahead.
Just a kind of a curiosity question again. In this model, I fully support kind of pulling back law enforcement in this situation and having other city staff be leading the charge. But what about the situation where you get a pretty irate individual, or you have some safety concerns for that staff member? There's still the option, I'm assuming, to, tag team that, between city staff and law enforcement.
Absolutely. There will be times when we have a citizen who is not happy with the city in such a manner that it will require the assistance of the police department, whether that's just going with the property maintenance person or the code enforcement person, because they fear for their safety, or there's some history of violence, or whatever the case may be. That's not an unusual thing that's happened. We will, of course, always make sure that we protect our inspectors, and the police will be part of this, hand in hand will be a part of this when necessary.
And if I could add, it's been my experience that the officers, the day officers, have been really helpful. The company, escorted me sometimes or alerted me to those properties where they feel there could be some personal safety issues with the city staff going out there. I think they've been great about alerting me to where I need to watch out, and also then just help me out on it's when the need arises.
It sounds like next steps on this, on the more near term, is evaluation of staffing resources, and that's part of, it sounds like it's part of a budget conversation, and then just ongoing evaluation of our existing ordinances and looking for opportunities for additional specificity, or where that may need to be cleaned up. Pete, one of the questions out there is, are we open to considering civil action? And, to the extent that there are existing cases that are out there, that is perhaps the last remaining untouched tool. I can only speak for myself, but I think, I'm open to hearing those recommendations as those cases evolve. I know there's been a couple of really challenging ones out there. I just want to only do so if we feel like that is really the last resort, and if we feel like we've internally done our homework, dotted our I's, crossed our T's, and that we're ready for that. It's challenging, and we never want to be in the situation of taking that approach. But if that is our last remaining option, I'm open to hearing that if that's kind of staff's recommendation. And kind of will give pause here to see if other council members have other thoughts on that. All right. Council members, anything further on this topic you'd like us to consider this evening, or points of input? All right. Pete, Patrick, do you feel like you have what you need from us?
I do.
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you so much. We are going to transition into staff updates. We'll transition after that into mayor and council updates, and then we will move into our closed session. But because of that closed session, we'll do staff updates at this time. With that, if we could start with Patrick, and then we'll move to Dan.
Yeah, I just have one item. We have received the dollar amount that we're going to get from the new federal assistance grants. We're going to get $2.19 million in assistance that we will have the ability to spend. Fortunately, this time the federal government has given a lot more clarity for what it can be used for, as opposed to when the initial CARE Act came out. We'll be looking closely at that. The legislation from Washington focuses heavily on infrastructure and encourages water, sewer, stormwater, and broadband expenditures. So as a staff, we'll be getting together and going over the policies that we have received from the state and the feds regarding what we can spend it on, and then try to come up with some recommendations and have a work session to inform the council what we see and how it's going to go. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Patrick. Any questions for Patrick this evening? All right, Dan and then Chief Peterson.
Mayor, members of the council, I have no updates unless you have questions of me.
Anything for Dan this evening? All right, Chief Peterson and then Chief Newman.
Mayor and City Council members, good evening. I have a few items for you tonight. Number one is we're hosting the Forest Lake Area Safety Camp at the City Center tomorrow. As in years past, Forest Lake Police and Fire will be again hosting and assisting with the camp, which is for kids in 3rd and 4th grades. The day is spent educating the campers all about safety at home and out on the trails, parks, and water, with an emphasis on bike safety. As you know, due to the pandemic last year, the safety camp was canceled, so it'll be nice having the campers back again this year. And number two, staff from all city departments have been meeting and planning for the July 4th festivities. We feel comfortable in our plans for the events. The police department will also have extra patrols out during the entire weekend, mainly in the downtown area. And lastly, you may have noticed extra patrol and police presence on our roadways, interstate, and highways. Last year during the unrest, many agencies were stretched thin patrolling on the roadways. And you may have seen the increase in speeds on our highways and interstates that unfortunately have sharply increased the number of injuries and fatalities on our roads. Today, we had a meeting with the Department of Safety. They stated as of there have been 174 fatalities on Minnesota roads to date this year, compared with 125 fatalities this time last year. And 80% of those fatalities are due to speed being the #1 factor. According to the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, Minnesota State Patrol, and many other metro area agencies have partnered with the Minnesota Department of Public Safety and increased our patrols on the roadways. And with the nice weather, we have been able to deploy the speed trailer out there on many of our city streets. So I'm hoping that we will see a decrease in speeds out on our roadways, and hopefully we'll see those numbers start decreasing here in the next few months on fatalities and injuries. Oh, and one more thing, congratulations to the Weiss family. Their 2 daughters are both on the varsity softball team, and they are currently at state competing for the state championship. So go Rangers. And other than those items, I don't have anything else for you unless you have questions for me.
Any questions for Chief Peterson this evening? All right, thank you, Chief. Chief Newman, and we will go to Pete after Chief Newman.
Good evening. I just have a couple updates for today. We're now accepting applications for the position of paid on call firefighter. I know I brought that up in the past, but we will be putting help wanted signs throughout Forest Lake and Columbus starting on Wednesday. And hopefully this additional signage will spur more applications. The application period will close on 9/1, and hopefully the application period closes on 9/1. Start date will be 1/1 of 22. And so we're looking to hire up to 5 paid on call firefighters. Last week we took delivery of 2 new vehicles. One was a Rosenbauer 3,000 gallon pumper tender. That is currently at Station 1. We will train on it for the next 30 to 45 days, and then that will go into service at Station 2. And then we took delivery of the emergency management mobile command van. That is a police fire asset, and we'll use it for law enforcement incidents, fire events, natural disasters, and community events. So we should hopefully have that into service here in the next 30 days as well. That's all I have for you, unless you have questions for me.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for Chief Newman this evening? All right, hearing none, Pete, and then we'll go to Donovan after Pete.
Your Honor, I don't have any update tonight, but I'm happy to take questions.
Anything for Pete this evening? Seeing none. Donovan and then Dave.
Mayor, members of council, my only update is that we did hire the summer intern, Laszlo Martin. I encourage you, if you come to, pick up your mail, to say hi to him. He's sitting right behind Aaron in the main administrative staff area. And happy to take any questions from council.
Any questions for Donovan this evening? All right. Going on to Dave and then Jackie after Dave.
No updates tonight, unless you have any questions for me.
Any questions for Dave? Dave, are you getting any complaints on gravel road conditions? I got a couple of texts over the weekend. People generally were already kind of leaving room that it was due to lack of rain, but just kind of a heads up. I'm sure you're kind of probably hearing the same.
Yep, the lack of rain, if you go out and grade it, it just turns to powdered sugar. So you just end up making it worse than it is right now. So once we get rain, we will be out there right away, but there's really nothing we can do right now.
Agree. They're in closer to late July conditions than late June.
Yep.
Anything else for Dave today? All right, we'll go to Jackie and then Karen after Jackie.
I don't have any updates today.
Anything for Jackie tonight? All right, and Karen.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. I do not have any updates for this evening.
Any questions for Karen? All right, we will transition over to council updates. Start with Councilmember Husnick and then Councilmember Munson.
Madam Mayor, I attended the program that it was held on at the Lakeside Park for the Memorial Day service, and it was well attended. Nice weather. It kind of threatened to rain right at the beginning, but that cleared up, and it was a great program. And kudos to the Legion for all their hard work making all that happen. So that's all I have tonight.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councilmember Husnick. Councilmember Munson and then Councilmember Bystrom after.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. The only update that I have is I attended the Planning Commission meeting last week, and they shared that we have
We'll come back to council. Nope, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Shared that we had approved the Fort Hill Farm PUD, and they totally understood that we had at the meeting more information than what they had when they had the meeting. So it was fine.
Fantastic. Thank you, Councilmember Munson. Councilmember Bystrom and then Councilmember Valento.
Nothing much for me, just acknowledging some citizen communication on the refuse and recycling increase. And just, we seem to have an ongoing issue with this. They just don't understand the difference between the contractually agreed upon rate increases and the dumping fees. They think it's all us. And I just would encourage communication around that issue, right around bill time. I think it would really be helpful because there's just a lot of misinformation out there about what that means. What's in our control, what the city is, controls in terms of that increase, and what is out of our control. So that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Bystrom. Councilmember Valento.
No updates for me tonight.
All right. I have just a couple of quick updates. Also attended the Memorial Day service, and nice that the rain held off, and very well attended. And thank you also to the Legion and the VFW for performing the service. The EDA meeting tonight, I know we've talked about this a couple of times with council. They did approve the new tracks agreement as an interim agreement. It is a 6-month term. The expectation that will come back on to, as part of budget process, into the city council budget as part of the 2022 contract year. And so happy to get additional information to council around the program and utilization of the program and all of that good stuff before you're asked to approve a renewal here in 2022. We also are evaluating the Downtown Business Improvement Incentive Program. There's been feedback points on a number of different points, some from staff and some from users of the program. Generally looking for areas of expansion. Our utilization has been lower than what we have historically had budgeted. And so trying to find additional ways to make those available dollars eligible within our community. The biggest consideration at this point is the expansion of the footprint. When the program was started, it started as a very narrow downtown footprint, and we're looking to consider a more community-wide type footprint, and then also to allow for a tiered program so that if somebody were to have a smaller project that they would qualify for a pro rata percentage share of dollars. That is still in discussion phases, but looking to make probably a recommendation sometime this summer, and then that historically has gone to council for approval ratification as well, just to make sure council and EDA are staying in sync on those programs. So look for more of that to come. Also just wanted to highlight the Everyone Belongs partnership with the Forest Lake Area School District and Area Communities has a demographics presentation that is a virtual presentation tomorrow at 6 p.m. Look for information on the school district website, and would look for, I guess it's a great opportunity just to learn more about changing demographics of the Forest Lake community. As the Everyone Belong program went through the Equity Innovation Lab, understanding demographics was kind of just a common foundational need, and happy to have a representative from the state demographer's office to come and speak to us specifically around how those are changing in Forest Lake. So would welcome everybody. I would like to see everybody there if possible tomorrow at 6 o'clock. And then also tomorrow is starts of Arts in the Park. And so fun to start seeing everybody in person on Tuesday nights. Always a great event. That is the end of our planned agenda for this evening from an active agenda and update perspective. We do have a closed session on our agenda for up next. And if somebody could move us into a closed session, that'd be great.
Mayor Bain, I move to close the meeting pursuant to Minnesota Statute Section 13D.05 Subdivision 3C3 to discuss PID 08.032.21.13.0132. The closed session will be held in a separate Zoom online room and will commence immediately. Once the closed session is completed, the City Council will reconvene the open meeting portion of tonight's City Council meeting in the regularly scheduled Zoom online room. There being no further items on the agenda, once back in open session, the council will simply adjourn the meeting.
There is a motion to close the meeting. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second from Councilmember Husnick. And Karen, could we have a roll call to close the meeting?
Councilmember Husnick.
Aye.
Councilmember Munson.
Aye.
Councilmember Valento.
Aye.
Councilmember Byström.
Aye.
And Mayor Bain.
Aye. And we are in closed session, and we'll see you all on the other Zoom link.